Have you ever gotten that feeling that some people are playing the financial game with a completely different rulebook? Well, today we're going to dig into that. We're deconstructing a really popular wealth webinar from Derek Whitehead to find out what he says is really going on. We're going to pull apart his system piece by piece and look at the exact strategies he claims can generate some serious capital.
Okay, so it all kicks off with this really provocative idea. You don't work for the money. The business is an excuse to get the money. I mean, just think about that for a second. That totally flips the script on everything we're told about following your passion, right? The argument we're about to explore isn't about building the next great company. It's about using the structure of a business as a very specific tool, a key, really, to unlock capital.
So the first big idea we have to wrap our heads around is this. Finance is a game. And we're not talking about a fun board game here. We're talking about a game with very specific and often very hidden rules. The whole claim laid out here is pretty simple. If you don't know the rules, you are pretty much set up to lose. But if you learn them, well, that's when you can get a massive, almost unfair advantage.
And this is how that game is supposedly stacked. You've got two groups of people, a tiny 15% who apparently know the rules, and then everybody else, the other 85% who are just taught to work for their money. Trade your time for dollars. The system, as he lays it out, is basically built so that most people are playing on a field that's seriously tilted in favor of the few who know how to create money, not just earn it.
Okay, so how do you actually get in the game? Where do you even start? Well, level 1 is all about getting capital. But here's the twist. It's not from your own savings. The strategy, which he calls the Credit Corp Fund, is all about getting your initial funding straight from the banks. And this is positioned as the absolute bedrock, the foundation for everything else. And the process he lays out, it's actually pretty straightforward. Step 1, you leverage your personal credit. You get it perfect so you can personally guarantee things. Then, and this is a huge step, he really emphasizes this, you form the right kind of corporation. Once you have those two things lined up, the goal is to go out and secure somewhere between, say, $200,000 and $500,000, and that's your seed money.
Now, this is a really important point. That $500,000, that is not the end goal. Not even close. The webinar makes it super clear. That is not go buy a fancy car money. It's just seed capital. Think of it as your buy-in, It's what gets you a seat at the table so you can move on to the more advanced levels of this whole game.
Okay, this next part is huge. This brings us to what the webinar presents as the single most important decision you will make. And it's not what you think. It's not about your amazing business idea. It's about your corporate structure. This isn't just some boring legal detail. This is the vehicle that supposedly determines if you can even play the game at all.
So, what are you thinking? An LLC, right? That's what everyone says to do. It's the most common advice out there. Well, according to this system, that is a hard no. In fact, the source material is, incredibly blunt about it. The quote is, if you don't want any money, get an LLC. Ouch.
So here's the thinking behind that. An LLC is framed as a shield. It's a defensive tool, something you use to protect yourself to limit liability if you're doing something risky. A C corporation, on the other hand, is presented as a sword. It's an offensive weapon. The claim is that this is the structure that was designed from the ground up for one reason and one reason only: to attract and absorb money from the financial system.
And this idea goes even deeper. The claim is that the whole system is basically a loop. You see, banks print money, and they need a legal place to send it, to lend it to. Well, according to this worldview, that entity is the corporation. It was supposedly created for the specific purpose of being a legal vessel for all that printed money. All right, so let's say you did it. You used your C Corp, you got the seed money from the bank. What's next? Well, according to this system, you stop. That's right, you stop going to the bank. The webinar is super clear on this. You do not want to get trapped in a cycle of bank debt. Level 2 is about graduating. You're moving on from being a borrower and becoming someone who attracts investors. And that is a whole different ballgame. Now, to make that jump to investor money, you need a very specific legal tool. It's called a Private Placement Memorandum, or PPM for short. You can kind of think of it as the official rulebook for your investment. It's the document that lays out the entire business plan, the terms of the deal, and this is really important. It discloses all the possible risks to anyone who might invest.
So the PPM is your legal foundation, but it's not the whole story. It can't do the job alone. You also need a killer pitch deck to actually, tell your story in a compelling way. And then the magic ingredient, stock certificates. This is the moment. This is where you stop just asking for money and you start actually selling a piece of your company.
And there's this great little story in the webinar. One of the speaker's early mentors was apparently handed a corporate kit with blank stock certificates, and he just said, man, this is like a license to print money. And that idea is so powerful, right? You're not asking for a loan anymore. You are literally creating and selling an asset.
You know, this whole process, selling stock in your private company, it might sound familiar. It's basically the same principle behind what we now call crowdfunding. And the webinar actually connects this directly to the Jobs Act, which was legislation signed under President Obama that really opened the doors and made it way easier for regular companies to go out and get private investments.
Okay, so we've looked at the tactics, right? First, bank funding, then investor funding. But according to this system, none of that stuff actually works unless you have the right mindset. The argument is you have to split your financial goals into two totally separate buckets. You've got your micro goals and you've got your macro goals.
And a huge milestone in this whole system is becoming what's called an accredited investor. What is that? Well, it's an official designation from the SEC for someone who has a high enough net worth or income. What it really is, though, is a key. It's a license to get into the higher risk, higher reward private deals that are totally off limits to most people.
So, what's that first target? What's the number? $1.5 million. But wait, according to this system, that's not your I'm rich number. Nope. That is your micro goal. It's the amount of capital you need to become an accredited investor, and maybe more importantly, to finally get out of what he calls financial survival mode.
And the difference between these two goals is actually really simple. The micro goal, that is all about lifestyle and security. It's about getting enough capital so you can finally stop stressing about bills. The macro goal, on the other hand, well, that's your huge, crazy, world-changing ambition. That's the billion-dollar idea that you can only really focus on once all those little micro needs are taken care of. And this right here is really the heart of the whole mindset. You just can't think clearly about building a billion-dollar company if you're worried about next month's rent. It's impossible. So the strategy is to use the financial system to solve your micro problem first. That's what frees up all that mental and emotional energy so you can actually go after the big macro vision.
And this quote really captures the whole philosophy behind setting that giant macro goal. If you shoot for the moon and you only reach the stars, you higher than every damn buddy else on this planet. It's all about setting a target that seems almost impossibly high. Because hey, even if you fall short, you could still end up in a totally different stratosphere than where you started.
And that brings us full circle, right back to the central question of this entire way of looking at money. Is a business a passion project, something you pour your soul into to make a living? Or is it just a tool, an excuse, like he said, to get the money you need to chase your real goals? This system argues, pretty forcefully, for the second one. And that is definitely a provocative thought to leave you with.